I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know all the things to do. Today on Homebrew Review, we're looking at some more Atari 7800 homebrew games that are all works in progress. Starting with A.R.T.I, which is the Archaeological Rescue Team International from Muddy Funster. You can find this beta demo on the Atari 7800 forum of AtariAge.com. Go there and look. There is a thread with the latest version available, and you can try it on the device of your choice, whether it's emulation, game drive, anything that will run A78 ROMs should work. There are compatibility notes in the forum and when you boot up the game, but I haven't experienced any problems using the 7800 game drive with it, so I don't think you'll experience much problems with it on anything else. If you hadn't already noticed or weren't familiar with it, this is clearly based on Hero by Activision, or should I say inspired by. The gameplay is quite similar, but graphically distinct, and of course there is a soundtrack to accompany it, which I certainly never heard on the Atari 2600 version of Hero, although I can't say that applies to any and all other versions of Hero, because it was released on many different platforms. And I suppose you might be saying, well, if Hero is an Atari 2600 game already, what's the point of making a clone or parody or inspired by version of it for 7800? Well, the enhanced chips you can use on the Atari 7800 for the background soundtrack, for one, this is Pokey enabled, so you're hearing actual music in the game, which is something most 2600 games couldn't do unless you put an extra chip in it, like Pitfall 2, coincidentally an Activision game. Now, let's be clear here. 7800 games did have enhancement chips as well. Commando, Ball Blazer, a few others, but if you're playing this with a game drive, you're already emulating a Pokey chip, or it has one built in, I forget which, but you've got that right there in your cartridge, so you're going to hear the background soundtrack without having to buy a chip and put it into anything, which is actually what I had to do with my Cuddle Cart 2 when I wanted to play Pokey-enabled games like Ball Blazer. I had to buy a Pokey chip and put it into the Cuddle Cart, and that's really not the best way to go, which is why there are clone chips now called Hokey, which emulate Pokey, because harvesting actual Pokey chips is getting harder and harder to do, and you don't want to destroy actual working 7800 cartridges just to get a Pokey chip out of them. Some arcade cabinets did use Pokey chips as well, but that's the same problem. If it's a working cab, you don't want to take a Pokey out of there. Anyway, bottom line here, A.R.T.I can do things that Hero couldn't do on the 2600 in terms of its graphical look, the multi-layered effects, the sounds. There's more robust capabilities for the 7800, so making a Hero clone for 7800 is a worthy project to take on, and I commend Muddy Funster for doing that. I think this plays great, looks great, keeps track of your high scores after you play. There's all sorts of good features here. Now, Muddy Funster is also working on Bernie and the Tower of Doom. I would say I'm a little less enthralled with this one than A.R.T.I, but it may be that it's just not as far along in development yet. But there are a few things that I haven't quite figured out yet, and there are a few things that are obvious whether I've figured them out or not. And the first is the lack of any sound of any kind. No sound effects, no background music, no nothing, which is why I think this one is in a much more beta state than A.R.T.I. Or it may be that Muddy Funster decided A.R.T.I was more promising and put all the resources into that game instead of into this game, but I just can't get around the actual gameplay here. You only have one offensive move, so far as I can tell, and that's to jump up and down on blocks to either release the stars you need to collect or pop the bubbles so that you can traverse through the level, and it scrolls all the way through top to bottom vertically, so if there's something blocking the way at the bottom and you remove it, you can fall through the bottom of the stage right back around to the top side. Now, all of that would be great, except for the fact that you don't have any kind of offensive weapons whatsoever for these enemies walking back and forth. None that I've found anyway, and most of these stars you can collect except if you get trapped on one side of an enemy when you're going from one higher level to a lower level, and you can't jump over them, and you can't knock them out, you can't stun them, so you just have to take the hit and die. And then there's the very last star on the level. When I collect all the others, I try to get to it before the enemy walking back and forth can come up and touch me, but I can't go up the ladder fast enough and get to it fast enough to jump on it enough times before he'll turn around and tag me. It's literally impossible. Unless there was some way to freeze or stun that enemy, I couldn't collect the last star on this level. So I don't know if that's a design flaw or if there's something I'm missing. I've tried all the buttons on my Genesis controller. I can't find a jump button. I can't find an attack button. I can't find any way to stun the enemies of any kind. So I'm just not very into Bernie and the Tower of Doom in this particular state. And I'm not saying Muddy Funster can't eventually make something out of this. It's got a good start. I just don't think there's enough here to recommend trying this beta ROM of the game for yourself. It's free, it's publicly available if you've got some time to kill, I suppose, but it's not playable like the other games I'm going to show you today. Not to me, anyway. And I apologize to Muddy Funster if I've missed something here. Please feel free to explain my mistake and what I'm missing in a way that you can either stun enemies or jump over them to survive, or if you can collect these stars faster than what I've been able to, because you'll see right here, I can't collect it fast enough to not die. So at that point, I gave up and moved on to Block'em Sock'em. Now, this is a game from Daryl Gunther, or Gunter, depending on how you pronounce it. We've talked about him on the channel before. And the immortal John Hancock, who you may know from his own YouTube channel. And he has an account on Atari Age, and is also working behind the scenes on games of his own. And with Daryl's help, Block'em Sock'em is coming to life with him as the protagonist. And it appears from reading the Atari Age forums that they're even working on producing a physical version of this for Atari 7800 consoles, and when it comes out, I will look forward to picking one up, because I find this to be a very fun game. This, too, is a game inspired by another game, this time one that I understand comes from Sega Genesis. Although I don't remember playing a Sega Genesis game like this, I will take their word for it. What you're doing here is you get multicolored blocks. Each time you have a block, you have to match it with the blocks of the same color by tossing it up. And then there are arrows along the areas where you're tossing the blocks that can move the block in different directions if it touches them. So it's a puzzle-solving game of sorts, where you have to match the colors, clear all the blocks, and hit all the arrows that lead to the other blocks to clear those blocks as well. And it's not always obvious what you have to do. Sometimes you can use the wrong block at the wrong time and unintentionally block yourself from completing a level, because some of them are power blocks that can match any color. But if you don't use those at the right time, you may not get the one you need later. There are only 3 levels in this demo version, so it too is a work in progress. But unlike Bernie and the Tower of Doom, I feel like you can actually play this one and enjoy it, even with the few levels that are actually in it. So I recommend getting the demo ROM from AtariAge.com. Just go to the Atari 7800 forums and download a copy of Block'em Sock'em. Try it on a game drive, a Concerto, a Dragonfly, a Cuddle Cart, an Atari 7800 emulator of your choice. Anything you can play this on. I think this one is pretty good. I don't know if it's reinventing the wheel. It's not the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's a fun little bit of time to play. It's not going to insult your intelligence to be solving these puzzles. And the only thing I would knock it for is that maybe the background music is a little bit tinny and repetitive, but since it is a work in progress, I think we can let that slide. It's probably not the final version of the music for the game, or the final anything for the game. The smiley faces on the blocks may change. The look of the protagonist, which is based on John Hancock, may change a little bit. who knows what they're going to change before the final version of this comes out, physically, digitally, or otherwise. So, to me, it's a very, very good start. I hate to compare it to Bernie in the Tower of Doom, but it's just more fun. And maybe Muddy Funster will make Bernie more fun. But right now, this one is fun, as it is, even with only 3 levels to play. So, check it out. If you're not already a subscriber to the Immortal John Hancock, look him up on YouTube. He's got a fun channel. He's a good-spirited guy. He loves collecting games, which so many of us do who have YouTube channels and share our passion for retro. So it's good to see him also becoming a developer, which, quite frankly, I don't know if I'll ever do. I took some programming in high school and college, but I don't think I've got the chops to make anything on an Atari 7800. And even if I did, I'd be 30 plus years out of practice at coding anything. So don't expect a homebrew game from Mr. MegaManFan. Not unless I got some serious help with it. But now that we're done playing the 3 demo levels that are available for Block'em Sock'em, let's move on to one last homebrew, Crazy Auto. Now you're going to need to disable game breaks if you're playing this on the game drive, because Crazy Auto is essentially the same as the Pac-Man collection, or specifically in this case, Ms. Pac-Man from the Pac-Man collection. It's a bit of a backstory here. The General Computing Corporation, or I think that's the correct abbreviation of GCC. Anyway, GCC was a group that was making mod kits for arcade cabinets, and people were getting to be too good at Pac-Man, and the profits for Pac-Man were going down for arcade operators. So GCC offered them a mod board. After they had already had success with one for Missile Command, they created one for Pac-Man that changed Pac-Man into Crazy Auto. Now, Valley Midway, which was licensing the game from Namco for production in North America, was not too keen on this idea of people putting mod boards inside their arcade cabinets, but instead of suing GCC out of existence, they brokered a deal and said, hey, how about instead of Crazy Auto, you create a sequel to Pac-Man for us? So all they really had to do at that point was give Ms. Pac-Man a bow. That's a joke because they actually say that in one of the commercials for the game. I'm more than Pac-Man with a bow! So they changed it to a female Pac-Man, and they changed the monsters back to the familiar monsters that we all know instead of these Crazy Auto monsters, and Ms. Pac-Man became a thing, which has become a legal quandary in and of itself because GCC created Ms. Pac-Man, Namco did not. And there's been licensing hell ever since. There has been a lot of things that Ms. Pac-Man is now retconned out of because of the fact that Namco kinda sorta owns the intellectual property of it, but then kinda sorta doesn't own the actual code that makes Ms. Pac-Man work. So perhaps Crazy Auto should make a comeback. Maybe this version should exist instead of Ms. Pac-Man, but you won't find it anywhere except here on the Atari 7800, which is, I believe, the only home version of Crazy Auto that has ever existed. I don't even think there's an arcade cabinet anywhere that has that mod board in it. I think when Midway came after GCC, that simply ceased to be a thing that existed. Ms. Pac-Man existed. There are plenty of arcade cabs of that. But nope, you're not going to find a Crazy Auto cab, not unless somebody has made one themselves. So it's good to play this game that sort of exists, but doesn't really. I believe there are ROMs dumped of it on arcade emulator forums, but this is the only home version. And guess who's responsible for that? If you said Bob, aka Pac-Man Plus, you'd be 100% correct, because he created the Pac-Man collection, the ports of Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, and Crazy Auto is just a variant of Ms. Pac-Man, like Ms. Pac-Man is a variant of Crazy Auto. So if you want to try this one, again, AtariAge.com, go to the forums for Atari 7800, look around, there will be a thread where Bob lists all of the different ROMs for projects that he's worked on over the years. And you can download Crazy Auto and try this freakish bootleg Pac-Man game that almost was but never would be. And before I wrap this up, before Homebrew Review comes to an end, I'm going to amuse myself by showing you who's been watching me play games this entire time. And it's not something he normally does, but I guess Buddy got curious about all these noises he was hearing, so he came down, parked himself on the carpet, and stared up at the TV the entire time I was playing. I was so amused by this, I turned on a bird watching video for him after I was done filming. So this is Mr. MegaManFan and Buddy saying thanks for watching Homebrew Review, and check out these games for yourself.